Hi, and welcome to the Raven Lunatics episode 5. I'm Dwight McPherson, comic writer and editor, and I'm joined by my friend.
I'm Chris Sumner, curator of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum, and we're joined by our new friend who absolutely is not Cat Stevens. Her name is
Cat Winters.
There you go. And young adult novelist award winner, and now working on a novel about Poe's early years.
Yes, this is teenage Poe.
It's more.
And this is the time from he's 17 until he's 18.
Yeah, I start the book in February of 1826, right before he goes to the University of Virginia, and the book ends about 14 months later. It's so funny. I'm being so careful not to give spoilers when I talk about the book. People could actually look up his biography and read what he was doing when the book ended. But we'll just say it ends in May 1827 when he has some changes in his life. So yeah,
no spoilers, but he was a ghost the entire time.
No, but it's just one of those things I realize when I'm talking about the book that people could easily even go on Wikipedia and see what he was doing in 1826 and 1827, find out the ending of the book. But it's the journey of how I get there that I'm hoping will be exciting. And so yeah, it covers most of the year when he was 17. It starts about a month after his 17th birthday, when he went off to college at a young age, and some of his difficulties there at college, and starting off though with his home, kind of establishing what was going on with his home life with the Allens before he went off to the university. And there's some supernatural elements involved as well. His Gothic muse plays a role in the novel, and it's the novel kind of takes a look at how he was developing that Gothic muse, going from a poet who was focused on his romantic poetry, his epic poetry. This was all when he was writing Tamerlane, getting ready to publish Tamerlane and other poems in 1827, and kind of the awakening of his macabre, more stereotypical Poe sort of stories, and how that came about. So there's a lot of realism into it. There's a lot of research that I poured into it. Most of the people in the novel are based on real life people from his life, everyone from the young men he met at the university to the Allen family. But I also am weaving in what I'm hoping to be a Poe-esque Gothic fantasy sort of feeling. It goes from reality into scenes of Poe's imagination. So that's been a lot of fun. It's been challenging finding the balance of getting all my historical details in there while also blending it into Poe fantasy sorts of scenes.
That's awesome. And that's challenging too, isn't it? You know.
Oh, it's been very challenging. That's probably been the hardest part. I think the supernatural side has been the hardest side for me. I just finished up a big stage of revisions, and most of those revisions involved the muse aspect that I'm doing. My editor didn't have any notes really on the historical elements that I was using. All my novels that I've written so far have been historical fiction, so I guess I've got that down fairly well. But it's always that all my novels blend paranormal and supernatural elements into the stories. This is probably my most supernatural of all of my books, just because I really wanted it to sometimes feel like a Poe story as you're reading it. So
awesome.
It's been fun, but yeah, definitely probably my most challenging book so far to write. And also because Poe's biography is sometimes so hard to pin down with all the gaps and the inconsistencies of people who knew him, and just even reading over his college friends. On one hand, one person said that he had a fight with Miles George, his roommate. Then you have Miles George saying, "No, I was never his roommate." So it just seems like there's a lot of arguments about what was real and what wasn't real in his biography. And I know Poe himself contributed a lot to that as well.
Right.
And
I think that's one of the cool things about
Richmond and Charlottesville, and you got to walk where Poe walked. And
yes, oh yes, yeah. fortunately, as soon as I started writing this book, I knew I needed to go to Virginia because the year that I'm covering was when he was in Virginia that entire year, except for the very end of the novel when he leaves. But I it was very convenient. I was contacted by the Virginia Library Association, and they invited me to go to Norfolk, Virginia, because they were bestowing an award on one of my other novels, and they wanted me to come to their library conference in last October, and that would have been a perfect time for me to do research. So I turned it into this major week where I went and I landed in Richmond. My sister joined me. We did a little bit of research really quickly because the next day we had to drive to Norfolk to receive this award. I spent a night in Norfolk at this big library convention. In the meanwhile, I had just had another new YA novel come out the month before, so I was doing some events for that book as well. And then we came back to Richmond, and we went to Charlottesville. I have a friend who lives right outside of Charlottesville, and she showed me around the University of Virginia. We saw Poe's dorm room and just kind of got the lay of the land there, since I talked quite a bit about the University of Virginia in 1826. And came back. The Poe Museum was our very last stop. That was something that I absolutely wanted to do. And at first I was a little concerned we wouldn't even be able to get to there, but we made certain that I got there, and that was amazing. That was wonderful. I got so excited about seeing his lock of hair and everything that you have there in the museum. And it just, even just walking through the streets, seeing where the house where he lived with the Allens, Moldavia. I got teary-eyed when I saw the plaque on the wall saying where that the house is long gone, but the plaque that exists saying where that house existed. I was so excited because I was writing scenes taking place on that street corner, and it's one thing to read books about it and see pictures about a site, but to actually go stand where your character, real or fictional, would have been standing and walking. That's just amazing, and it's just, you get a sense of what the weather's like, what the slope of the land is like, and even though it certainly has changed in the 200 plus years since he was living there, it was still very helpful compared to just sitting here in Oregon and imagining what all that would look like. So I was very fortunate that I could go to Virginia and walk in Poe's footsteps.
That is cool.
What made you want to write a book about Poe right now?
Well, I've been interested in Poe in a long time. So how this all started was in 2016. I was in the middle of a contract I had signed a 2-book contract with my YA publisher, wrapped up the first book, and then I suddenly needed to come up with an idea for a second book. And I had various ideas. Nothing was quite working. And I was wandering around my house one day, and I thought it might be interesting if I actually wrote about a real life historical figure. All my books so far have been about completely fictional people, real life historical events, but fictional people. And since I knew it was going to be a YA novel, it needed to be about the teenage years of a historical figure. And the first person that just automatically came to mind was Poe, just because I've been fascinated by Poe for decades. I think my first real introduction to him was probably in middle school. I think it was my middle school drama class. I believe we read The Telltale Heart. I remember reading Annabelle Lee right around the same time. And then when I was in high school, in my 11th grade English class, we were all assigned American authors, and I happened to get assigned Edgar Allan Poe. And I even still have my book that I used back then. This is my old book from I think it's probably about 1988. A little collection it's The Telltale Heart and Other Writings, and had all of his big stories and poems. And I've just always been very fascinated. I've been very into Gothic literature, ghost stories from a very young age. So it was such a good fit when my teacher assigned Poe to me. It just seemed like, oh, of course I'm getting Poe. And I did not keep that paper that I wrote about him years ago. I kind of wish I still had that. I don't remember what I said about him back then, but and I've always kind of wanted to see a big movie about Poe's life. I've always on the lookout for somebody to cover his life. I remember there's the John Cusack film, The Raven, came out about 2011 or so. And I was all excited about that, but then I realized they're making a very fictionalized version of Poe. He was, I think, solving murders based on his stories. And I always thought Poe is such an interesting person in of himself. Why don't people make a major movie about him, the real Poe? And so that's always been something in my head. And as I was walking around in my house trying to think of who to write about, I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to tell my Poe story. If I'm so interested in Poe and want to see something about Poe, why don't I do it myself? And I didn't know anything about what he was like as a teenager. I wasn't even certain where he lived as a teenager at the time when I came up with the idea. So it involved all new research for me. I had to dive in and see what he was doing when he was a young man, and saw there was plenty of conflict. Writers need conflict when they're going to sit down to write a novel. And he certainly, especially at the age of 17, when he was leaving the Allen family and going off to college and having difficulties financially because of his foster father, John Allen, there was so much conflict there. I didn't really need to come up with anything fictional other than the muse side of the story, but all the events are pulled straight out of his life, because I just think his life is exciting on its own and intriguing, and did not want to make him solve crimes based on his stories or anything, put anything like that in. So like I said, I try to use as much realism as possible, even though there is a supernatural element to it.
Maybe someone will make a movie on it.
We'll see. Yeah, I have no control over that. I have a movie agent, somebody who handles the film rights, and that's all in their hands. But I see my novels very cinematically, so I like to put my readers really into the scenes. I like to think of my novels as literary time machines. And I kind of thought of this book as my literary rock opera, is what I'm calling it, because I have a lot of scenes involving the creation of his poetry. And I kind of started seeing them almost like musical numbers, because I have this mythical muse working with them. And it was just kind of my way. Once I started looking at it as this rock opera, it kind of became this big theatrical novel, which I hope Poe might have liked himself, since he liked the theatrical. And I really pulled out he liked to entertain his friends on the campus of the University of Virginia, so I really pulled that out in a lot of scenes. So that's where some of the musical numbers come in, is him entertaining his friends there on campus.
So it could come out to a musical.
Now I'm even more excited about it. Awesome.
So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Like I said, it's been definitely a challenge. I was writing a version of it. I started, like I said, in 2016, and that version I was starting when he was 14 years old, so when he was a very young teenager, and I was going to follow it up to the age of 18. But it was starting to get really long and seeming kind of boring to me. So I showed it to my agent. I said, what's going wrong? It seems like a novel about Poe should be exciting, and this is not seeming exciting to me. And she said it was feeling too much like a middle grade narrative nonfiction book. So she said, I think we need to make him older to start with, and kind of get right into the thick of the conflicts of his later teen years. So that made a huge difference. And then, like I said, I've been working out the whole muse side of things, and I think I finally at this point got it kind of figured out. Like I said, I have more editing stages coming, but hopefully, fingers crossed, I'm getting this book figured out, and I'm at the point where I'm really very excited about it. I love what it's become.
And before we actually went on air, you were telling us about the process where you are right now. You've gone through it. You've cut it up by about 75%.
Yes. So how it works is I turned in my finished manuscript to my editor. Her name is Maggie Lehrman. She's with Amulet Books, which is an imprint of Abrams. I turned in the completed manuscript last December, so she had time to look over it. And then she sends me, and this is the stage for every book, she sends me a letter, and the page length can vary. This one was about a 4-page letter saying all of her suggestions for the book. And all the suggestions, I think I said previously, were all related to the supernatural side of the novel. So I had to really rethink the whole structure of the book. I was kind of making it like two separate plots where I had the novel about Poe, and then I had a novel, the story about his muse. So I wanted it to integrate those a little bit more and make the muse feel more organic and make it seem more like a Poe story. And I read a lot of Poe's works. Like every morning before I sat down, I would read one of his stories or his poems and really try to get his language into my head. His vocabulary is just astounding. And I would keep track of all his favorite vocabulary words and try to, I found lists online of people who had collected some of his favorite vocabulary words. So you'll see the word tarn in the novel. I tried to weave those into the book and make it seem as Poe-like as possible. So yeah, so that was what's called the editorial letter stage. I just wrapped that up last week. And then now my editor will be looking at it again. And then we go into what's called the line edits. And that's where she goes through the manuscript. She turns on the tracking changes in Word. And she goes through line by line and makes suggestions, everything from grammar to awkward sentences, or to bigger story ideas. If there's something still not working with the main story or with one of the characters, she'll tell me. I've written chapters at the line edit stage. And then we go, once she approves those changes, it moves on to the copy editor, and they really go through and comb through for all the grammar problems and awkward sentences. And they look for historical inaccuracies the whole time too. They'll flag things and say, is this an anachronism? Did this really happen? And a lot of times I'll go and I'll look it up online and send them a link saying, yeah, this actually occurred. Here's a link, or else I'll find out that it is an anachronism and have to fix it up. And then after that stage is over, the manuscript gets typeset, and then we proofread the typeset manuscript. There's proofreaders working on it there. There's managing editors, and we go through the typeset manuscript a few times. I usually see that in one or two stages. And then usually even like a few weeks before the book's going off to be printed, I'll get emails saying the managing editor found a few more awkward phrases, or we need to cut a few sentences short, and will have me run through a few last minute changes. And so it seems like it's all done up to the very last minute, where we're just constantly making changes, making the book as strong as possible. But I really like that. I'm a perfectionist, so it makes me feel better knowing that we're really combing through everything and getting everything as smooth and polished as it can possibly be, and as strong as it can possibly be.
I appreciate you sharing that writing process, because I know a lot of the fans are like, where's the book?
Right.
They just think that we sit down and write this book and then boom, it happens. But
Right.
there's a long process that
there is.
actually goes from the idea to the written page to the actual book that they can pick up from their bookstore.
Right.
So I appreciate that. Well, let me ask you this. What's your earliest memory of Poe or his work?
Well, probably, like I said, I think in middle school is when I first started reading his work, and I do believe it was The Telltale Heart was probably the first one I came across. My son is 13 and in 8th grade, and he just read that in his middle school last Halloween and came home saying, hey, he knew I was working on this book. He said, I read Poe. He wanted to read the Raven after that, so I gave him my old copy here. I said, here's my old teenage copy of Poe books, of Poe's stories and poems. So he read that. And I know Annabelle Lee was an early one, because I remember reading it in classroom, and we were all a little creeped out by the ending, wondering if he was sleeping with his dead wife there. So I remember that was a strong reaction to his work, was like, is he talking about sleeping in her tomb? What's going on with this guy? And I, even before that, I remember all the Poe movies being on TV. I didn't see them, but I remember all the Vincent Price films. I grew up in Southern California. We had a great channel, KTLA, in Los Angeles, and they aired all the old 60s, 50s, and 60s movies, all the horror films. And so I'd see commercials for those. So that was probably my very first time of hearing of Poe. But like I said, I was very into Gothic literature at a very young age. So just as soon as I found Poe's works, and when I was assigned him as my author in 11th grade, I thought, oh, here's an author who speaks to me, my my angsty teenage heart. And I was already writing some dark stuff myself as a teenager, and I remember my mom being a little bit worried about some of the things I was writing. And so it's kind of funny was as I'm working on this novel about Poe, and people will ask me, why did he write such dark things? And I'm kind of answering that question in this novel, and I realized my mom was asking that about me. And some of it isn't, I mean, certainly he definitely had a lot of dark stuff going on from a young age, but I think part of it too is he just really enjoyed writing that. And I think people would be surprised at how sometimes he didn't come off as this creepy guy in real life, that part of it is just the fun of scaring people and producing that reaction, and knowing that the public really does enjoy a good horror story. And they always have. I think horror stories really stand the test of time. If you look at some of the authors who are still wildly popular from the 1800s, it's authors like Poe and Shelley and Stoker. They really do stand the test of time, and their characters stand the test of time.
Absolutely. So what would you say is your favorite Poe story then?
Well, oh gosh, that's a hard one. Like I said, I've been reading a lot and rereading a lot. I'm really a big fan of The Mask of the Red Death, just because I love writing atmosphere myself. That's one of my favorite things writing. I love the atmosphere he creates. I do have a scene in The Raven's Tale, my novel, that is kind of a tribute to the atmosphere he created, the rooms of the different colors, and just there's just really not a lot of character development in that story, but just it really gives you chills by the end. Just the mood and the descriptions he used, and so I was studying that one quite a bit too, when I was reading it. But yeah, they're all fascinating. I started reading more of his comic stories, which I had never really read much. I do talk a little bit about his satirical side, especially at the university, he was really starting to show that off. And when he went on to West Point too, that was, I know, something that entertained his fellow college and West Point fellows. So that was interesting to see that side of him too, because I always had grown up thinking he was mostly an author of the macabre, but he does have a lot of humor in his work, so which is fun. And I love his poems. His poems are just fascinating to me. I love the rhythm of them. And like I said, since I'm calling this a rock opera, I think a lot of it is just because I was really looking at the way he used rhythms and rhymes, and just there's a certain beat to his work. I read an article, or I think it was an interview with Maya Angelou, and she talked about how she was a huge fan of The Raven when she was little, and she compared it to a rap song because of all the internal rhymes of the poem. And there's a great story. I can't remember if it was which publication interviewed her, but she said that she went to see Gregory Peck do a reading of The Raven, and he wasn't doing it with the syncopation that she was hearing in her own head when she read it, and she got mad. She was a small child during this, and she had to be ushered out of the theater because she was getting mad that he was reading The Raven incorrectly. So I stumbled across that story. I thought that was interesting to see the way that he's affected all sorts of people, other writers, just because he seemed like he had such a fascination with language and the way you use words and the rhythm of words, the music of words.
Absolutely. The word master is what I call him. I mean,
Right.
he really is. Absolutely. And complex. I think that's what we talk, Chris and I talk about that a lot, the complexity of Poe. And
Right.
he would not be nailed down to one genre. It's funny. And like you were talking about with emotion, I think he wanted to make people feel something. And if you can make people feel fear to build that atmosphere and make people actually afraid, I mean, that sticks with you.
Right.
You know, I think we all remember those movies that we saw that, scared us half to death. Oh man, I remember that. I'll never forget that. It sticks with you.
Definitely.
I cannot wait. I was excited before but hearing you actually talk more about the book, I am thrilled. I cannot wait to read it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been fun. Like I said, it's been definitely difficult, but I think the more I work on it, the more I figure it out, the more I realize, oh, I'm so glad I'm writing this book. I feel like this is a book that's been in progress since my teacher handed me Poe as my author way back years ago. So I'm thankful to Mrs. Mays of Thousand Oaks High School in California for assigning me Poe years ago, because I think that definitely set the wheels turning for this book. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it's fun because I think people will be surprised at the other sides of teenage Poe. He was an athlete. He was a major athlete, and so I do touch on that side of him. He went to prep schools. He was raised by a wealthy family, and just I think there's going to be some sides of him that people will be very surprised to see, and not thinking. I think people probably have the idea that he was probably just a moody, gloomy young man, which was the case at some times, definitely. But I'm also showing that there was more to him. You couldn't just pinpoint him or pigeonhole him as just an angsty, moody teenage boy.
Well, where can we follow you online?
Well, my website is catwinters.com, and I'm putting a lot of updates about the book up there. There's a place at the top of my website where people can subscribe to my posts on my website. I'm on Twitter as Cat Winters. I'm on Instagram as Cat Winters Books, and on Facebook as Cat Winters Books. Cat Winters was already taken on those two sites, unfortunately. I have a Pinterest page where I've been putting some of my inspirations, just kind of the aesthetic of the book, and I listen to a lot of music, so sometimes I post music that's been inspiring me throughout the process. I actually can't remember offhand if my Pinterest is Cat Winters or Cat Winters Books, but I have all the links on my website, catwinters.com. If you go there, you can find all the places where I hang out.
And you're always interested about the book. You can get the inside scoop on that.
Yeah, I've been taking pictures of the behind the scenes. It's not necessarily exciting, but I'll take pictures of the manuscript and process and put it up there for my readers to see. And people do get excited to see what the book's doing. And we should have a cover for the novel, I'm guessing, by the end of summer. I haven't seen anything for it yet, but that's always exciting when my publisher shows me the covers for my books. So I'll be probably able to share that around August or September, because the catalog, this will be coming out in spring 2019. So the catalog for that season will be coming out from my publisher probably end of August or September. So I should have my official catalog synopsis and the cover by then. So I'm excited. I cannot
wait.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been fun.
Well, keep us updated.
Well, and I love that you're passionate about Poe as well.
Oh,
that's
definitely.
One thing we wanted to make sure. We got people that were passionate about Poe, and
yeah,
I'm excited. You got me excited. Sitting here, I'm ready to write some more about Poe.
Oh, good. Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, it's very interesting figure. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot could be. I mean, you could probably take every year of his life and create a novel out of it, and there's just various different aspects of his life that and I know people have highlighted later years, and I've read your comics. I got my issue 3 that just came the other month. I finally got a chance to sit down and read that, and it was fun to see what you're doing and bringing in Griswold. I love that Griswold made an appearance. So I love that you're taking the later part of his life and turning it into a comic. I think that's so cool.
Thank you. Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned the other years of his life. I don't know if you can divulge this or not, but if the book does exceptionally well, is there a chance we might get another year of his life?
Well, it's interesting because I have never written a sequel before. All my novels have been standalones. And I've always been encouraged by my editor and agent to do standalones. I don't know, part of it is just because my books have not been bestsellers yet, so they're not necessarily, I think once you reach like bestseller status, you'll be more likely to be able to do a second or third novel. But I think there is an art in writing standalone novels, of having a story that ends. This one does end with a big kind of major door opening to the next stage of his life. And certainly I could write more, but I'm not sure if I will at this point. I might see how the book does. I kind of like where it ends right now. I don't know if I could replicate the energy of this particular book, because it's such a major year of conflict that I cover in this novel, where it's when he's leaving home for the first time and making his way in the world on his own, and kind of gaining that strength to go out and make it on his own, not necessarily by choice. He doesn't. There's a lot of factors with his foster father not providing the funds for him at college, which leads to lots of problems, and him embarking on his new path. So currently, I like where the story ends. I like this snapshot of his life at 17 and early 18. So we'll see. We'll see. It might be fun to sometimes jump a little bit later in his life too. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot going on. I'm kind of glad I didn't have to deal with the marrying the cousin stage in this particular novel. So that's a whole other issue that I didn't even have to touch. Yeah, this one he's more concerned with Elmira Shelton, his teenage sweetheart. So it's fun bringing her. She's definitely a major character in the book, and I know when I read about Poe early on in my life, I did hear about him marrying his young cousin, but I never heard anything about Elmira Shelton or any of the other women in his life. So yeah, so and then there's a few ghosts that might make an appearance as well. So we get a lot of people in his life covered in his early years covered in this novel.
That is fantastic. Well, I know everybody who watches this show is going to go out and buy a copy. So
well, thank you.
Encouraging everybody, go get it.
Yeah,
when it's available.
It'll be spring 2019. I think pre-orders, they're not available yet, but I know by the end of the summer, when the catalog's all up and running, the pre-order options will start popping up. So if, like I said, if you go to my website and subscribe to my posts or follow me on Twitter, I will certainly make a big announcement when the pre-orders are available. But yeah, and I hopefully to get to a few bookstores. I hope to actually go back to Virginia maybe for this one. I did make a stop in Fountain Bookstore in Richmond for one of my other novels when I was there last October. So I would love to get back to that area, and maybe a few other post stops like Baltimore to promote the book. Yeah, so I'm excited.
Well, we're looking.
Are you there, Chris? No, there's you. Okay. Well, Kat, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'm so excited and keep up with this web series. I'm very excited. I think you guys announced it the same day I announced the topic of my book. I think we all did this on Poe's birthday. I remember seeing your announcement pop up, so I was excited to find that you're doing this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Kat, and we will definitely have you back.
Wonderful. I would love to be back. Thank you so much for having me, and keep up the good work with Poe.
Well, thanks. Thank you for helping promote Poe with your books.
Oh, I'm excited too. Yeah, very, very excited to bring it in, and it's fun seeing the early excitement whenever I mention what the book's about to people. Their eyes light up, and you can tell there's still just a lot of love and fascination with Poe.
Absolutely, and that's a good thing. So, Kat Winters, thank you so much for joining us, and we will have you again in the future.
Wonderful.
Take care.
Thank you. Look forward to it. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, it's great to see the process there, wasn't it?
Absolutely, it was. Absolutely. And what have you got going on, Chris? I know you got some cool stuff going on.
I'm working on a paper about Poe and spiritualism. and how the spiritualists inspired him and were inspired by him, particularly in stories like Mesmeric Revelation and the Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. I'll be delivering it in Kyoto next month. And then on June 28th, we have our next Unhappy Hour, so prepare for despair again. We'll have live music and a cash bar, and the exhibits will be open for everybody to see.
Awesome. Lots of good stuff. And of course, I've got my Kickstarter that launches this Friday at 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we have a lot of Poe goodness going on.
More Poe for Poe.
That's right. That's right. So once again, thanks to Cat Winners for coming on our show, and we hope you've enjoyed it. Contact us, let us know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, like our videos, talk with us. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you think about our show and how it could be better, and other guests that you may like to see on the show. Let us know. We're open to anything, right, Chris?
Right on. As long as it's got some kind of Poe connection.
There you go. There you go. It's all about Poe. So we will see you next week. And there I go again. We will see you in 2 weeks. So we're signing off for now. See you later.